A very good evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate. Very many people are still drowsy because they miscalculated the time for the what has been billed as the biggest boxing fight of the century, Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather, which ended up playing towards 7 in the morning, and people had started waiting for it through the night, thinking it would be at 4 o'clock. So I know that a lot of people will be feeling sleepy. Charles Mwangushampagi is my name, and tonight we'll be discussing electoral reform proposals in the Constitution Amendment Bill presented before Parliament, or simple window dressing, especially the provisions around the reformation of the Electoral Commission. Do they go far enough? If they don't, what is in those proposals? Also be discussing a crisis in Burundi over attempts by President Pierre Nkurunziza to extend his time beyond the 2-term limit in the Constitution, also put at the time of the Arusha Code that brought sanity to that tiny central, some people call it central, but actually East African country. We'll be discussing that in a moment. Let's start with the question of the proposals, and let me introduce in studio tonight, starting with Onapito Ekomoloit, Corporate Affairs Director, and Alboris Esebimela. Some people call him still State House spokesperson, having served with the President and the veteran journalist. Always a pleasure to have you.
Without pay.
Without pay.
You're not paid?
No, I mean now.
Okay.
Always a pleasure to have you. Ona was a member of Parliament, so he understands the processes of lawmaking and the bill that's been presented before Parliament. Joseph Ochieno prefers to be called as a man from Nagongera, but he actually lives in London, and he's a UPC activist and party member. Joseph, very nice to have you.
Good to be here. I live in Nagongera. London is a place where I go instead of going to the bushes of Luweero once in a while.
Once in a while. You've spent more time in London than you've spent in Nagongera over the last 30 years.
Well, the first 15 years was not my choice. The last 10 years, I better go to London, go to Nairobi, get a bit of salt and sugar, rather than going into the streets of Kampala and being called Umubi, you know. Umubi or pocketing it, because I don't have access to Bank of Uganda. There you go.
So you are in a coward's
Somebody has
paradise.
got to survive, but I'd rather survive properly.
Jotham Taremwa, Principal Public Relations Officer of the Electoral Commission.
Thank you, Jack.
Very nice to have you, and of course my colleague Chris Obore.
I could actually be your Chris.
Now I'll be happy to call you that.
Tell us.
Let me start with you, Chris. People have been clamoring and waiting for electoral reform proposals. Government has waited for too long, and people say, having been involved personally with some of these processes and asking questions from as early as 2012, 2011, immediately after the last election, to ask that the proposals needed to be brought early so that they could be integrated properly if there was serious commitment to enforcing them. Now you have seen the proposals, and people are running away with what government has fronted as what appears to be the principal proposal. Rename the Electoral Commission Independent Electoral Commission of Uganda. Do you think these proposals go far enough to answer the concerns about constitutional reformation and creating the ground for proper functioning democracy?
I will disappoint you, Charles, by saying proposals or no proposals, I don't care. What I actually want, the reforms I want, are government reforms. What we are focusing on is elections, to bring in one group as you remove another group of eaters. I simply want to see reforms in government on how government can be made effective to benefit each and every citizen. These elections, with or without them, there is no change in our lives. What changes is the lives of those who eventually win. So when we focus ourselves on election, it is an event that will end. By May next year, there will be a new president, there will be a new parliament. How will that parliament perform is what concerns
Will
me.
there be a new president and a new parliament? Because that's been the biggest debate, that you
In
have
the
gone
sense
through
that there will
motions.
be a newly elected president. Of course, the next president will be President Museveni. So I even don't know why this exercise is causing a lot of problems. So my interest in this is, if you are talking about the Electoral Commission, it doesn't change much. You can call it Independent Electoral Commission. In fact, I suggested, if the word independent is what we want, let's name Independent Parliament of Uganda, Independent Revenue Authority, Independent UNRWA, Independent, so that we see whether that word independent is going to deliver for us what we want. So we are discussing non-entities. I am interested, if the reform on how government works, public service is dead. The Secretary of Cabinet is effective as a Secretary of Ministers when they are meeting. But as a head of public service, dead. And they are telling us here they need to start another salary stabilization agency. They are simply saying we are going to expand
a commission to
yes,
set
we are going to
salaries
recruit
for
more
public
people
servants.
and yet stabilizing salaries should have been the work of Mitala and his group. We have a fully fledged Ministry of Public Service. We have fully established Public Service Commission, but they are seen to be incompetent to stabilize salaries. So we bring an agency. Agencyfication, we talked about it here. So, Charles, those things concern me. This business of saying, oh, you see, it is for Cheno who has get power. I'm concerned when Cheno gets power, what does he do with the power? Those are the reforms, Charles, the country should be discussing. For instance, I should be concerned, how do we make an MP effective? If you get to parliament, guys go there and simply sign on a book and run away. For me,
increasing their numbers.
Their numbers.
In the new
Me,
proposal.
I'm saying, if somebody has been elected an MP, how are we going to assess their performance? Those reforms, I will participate vigorously in discussing, offering solutions. These other ones is for you to know whether Tarama is doing a good job or not, whether he does a good job or he does a bad job, is still ushering in wrong people.
Okay. Let me run over from Teso. I'll go back to Teso. Let me turn a bit of a comrade.
Using the people in Teso don't want reforms.
You sat in that parliament, and we've been watching going through these motions. On the outward, we're making an attempt at becoming a democratic country. And you make a democratic country by putting in place the infrastructure that can actually deliver you to a democratic country, a democratic dispensation. And people wait for these reforms. The Electoral Commission demanded for them in 2012. Civil society demanded for them in 2013. IPOD demanded for them, I think, in 2013, and others. And now, when they finally come, the most fundamental is change the name of the Electoral Commission, and people are saying, who are you taking for a ride? Maybe the other one is increase the size of parliament when people have been clamoring for a reduction of the size of parliament. Do these reforms go far enough, you think?
They don't. And in fact, I totally agree with Chris Obore. You don't need any more paper reforms. You need a mindset reforms. Everything Chris Obore is clamoring for cannot be brought by leaders as a means of getting saved. It can only come out of pressure. So if there is any reform that is needed in this country, it's in the mindset of the Ugandan voters to believe that government is your servant and you order your servant. You don't plead with your servant. You don't expect your servant to decide what to do. No leader across the world will ever do anything without adequate pressure. So if any reform is needed, it's in the mindset. Right now we're in a state of cynicism as voters, apathy. That's why you're having lower turn-up in voting. It's going to become potential lower. So the first reform is, can Ugandans awaken to know that government is there to do stuff. It's not to be begged for. Then the other one is,
but what is the mindset?
The other reform which is being forgotten is we cannot continue with this winner take it all. Political desperation is actually a recipe for chaos. In this country, if you are not in government, so to say, you are finished. It doesn't matter whether you lose the election by 0 point something, you are finished. I think we need to bring a political culture. Joseph is from the UK, but being in the opposition in the UK does not mean you are finished. You still have something to hold on to. The mechanisms, what the Electoral Commission has started with the funding political parties, already there was excitement, that's small money. So we need even a reform that allows proportional representation. For me, that's the reform I need, where power is not out of desperation.
Yes, you talk about cynicism, you talk about the mindset of the Ugandan voter.
Yeah.
What do you say about the mindset of the person pushing these proposals in the way they are? Because they're also Ugandan at the end of the day. They might be holding power now. Are they also being cynical? Are they looking at the rest of the country and saying, what can you do?
Look, I think the reforms really, it's papering over the problem. I don't think it's a serious thing. I don't think even government believes that you actually need reforms to change anything about the behavior of if the Electoral Commission is seen to be partisan. It cannot change without adequate pressure. It cannot change because Parliament wishes it to change, the law says it should change. These are human beings. They have interests. And across the world, if you have interests, you must fight them with adequate popular pressure. I don't think the current Electoral Commission cannot deliver a fair election, even without the word independent. So long as there is adequate pressure to avoid any element of cheating by individuals, there will be a fair election. So you don't need a fundamental change to the Electoral Commission to deliver a fair election. I don't believe that.
Let's move from Teso and go deeper into Eastern Uganda to Nagongera and get Joseph Ochono's views. Joseph, you came here and during what was seen as the transition period for the Uganda People's Congress and participated in the last election, the 2006 election, I think. Yeah, 2006 election. And then you've been watching and putting a bird's eye view to events in this country. The demand that you move to create a legal regime that can deliver the country and be seen to move it forward is critical for African countries, especially this time. If we are not just making pretending about our attempts to democratization. So when you see government present this set of so-called reforms that everybody is rallying against and saying, we don't see ourselves represented in this, what does it say about that commitment to democratization?
You know, Charles, thanks for having me. In fact, you've completely changed how I was going to introduce my conversation. I will deliberately broaden it, and I think I want to broaden it up for Ugandan peoples. And that is that Nagongera is my home, but I'm reasonably lucky enough to have a broad experience on the African continent, to write and research and have conversations with many, many peoples of African descent, and to observe African countries in the mainland and African countries, including in the diaspora, and also occasionally to observe other countries, how they do their things. And to me, the more I actually do observe those things, the more actually angry I get. The second element is what you suggest about 2006, 2005. As somebody who was made a refugee in this country, from this country, by this government, for being nobody else except an Easterner who was a UPC supporter and who said no to NRO in 1987. To go and spend and waste 17 years of my life in exile. Because of people who came from the bush, went to the bush claiming that elections had been rigged, and for that reason they came in to sort it out in 1986. And nearly 30 years later, we are talking about an electoral commission which, in all but name, a property of the head of the state, who was a participant in the 1980 general elections, means, and I think as my two colleagues have suggested, that this conversation is an absolute waste of time and waste of resources for Ugandans, because it is not about electoral reforms. It's not even about constitutional reforms, because as I suggest, while in exile and up to the time I returned to this country in 2005, I was campaigning for it. I was part of the group campaigning for return to constitutionalism, both in UPC and in this country. And part of our job then was to say and hope that once we return ourselves to constitutionalism, it will be in the party and it will be in the country. So it is so heavily frustrating. Now,
isn't it strange that you, Joseph Ochono, from the Uganda People's Congress, says it's so frustrating, because people trace back and say this crisis we're in actually starts with the Uganda People's Congress government tinkering with the electoral process in 1980.
You can actually have a conversation with me. I think that one you need it now, and I'm quite content coming back and having you and me and chat about this, because it's an interesting point. We're just having a conversation before we came on air. I want Mr. Museveni, after 30 years, to prove to the people of Uganda that 1980 general elections was rigged in favor of Uganda People's Congress. That's one. He hasn't proved it. DP hasn't proved it. Ugandans haven't been convinced about it. To the extent that if today, 30 years later, under Mr. Museveni, we can have a conversation about electoral reforms, and Mr. Museveni, who went to the bush 1 month after UPC had been elected into power, having lost in Nyabushozi, to Sam Kutesa, a DP, and to date they can't prove it to us. It's a shame. If NRA needed to do anything in this country, Ugandans, they needed by today, after 30 years, to show Ugandans that, you know, we can actually help successfully organize clean elections. And they haven't. Do you know what? At the moment, the current electoral commission, some of the commissioners were belligerents of 1980 so-called elections rigging. In other words, it is quite clearly partisan, driven by self-interest. That's one. Number two, quite clearly this government...
Joseph, I'll come back to you in a moment. Let me come to Jotham briefly, because we need to be taking a break shortly. Jotham, You work at the Electoral Commission, you're the principal public relations officer, and you're thrown into this quandary now where proposals have been presented for reformation of the commission. The commission has been talked about as being non-independent, partisan, as some people have put it. How does this environment help you as the Electoral Commission deliver a credible, clean election for Ugandans?
Do you know jazz music? Jazz music. It is playing, there is sound, but you can't hear the words. But you will keep hearing the sound, but you don't see the words.
And it's nice.
You don't hear the words. So this electoral reforms, it is jazz music. I want to know what reforms those ones are. And I think Joseph has been out of this country for quite some time. He just jumps in when there is an election and goes out after the election. And he has not had time to look actually at the Electoral Commission Act, to read the Constitution and see where the loophole is, that he can point out that gap before the,
can we speak about,
before the public.
Can we speak about specifics? Okay. You are, by all intents and purposes, for all intents and purposes rather, a civil servant.
Yes.
Would that be correct?
Yes. I'm a public servant.
You're a public servant.
I'm not a civil servant.
In 2012, the Electoral Commission made proposals for reformation of the Electoral Commission Act to give you a better environment.
Are they the ones they are talking about?
I'm asking the question to you. The bill presented to Parliament, does it represent the views you presented?
Are they even being talked about by these reformists who were proposing, for example, Electoral Commission staff who are very busy on the day of voting, you people, the media, because you could be deployed to any part of this country to cover an election, our officers and men outside Uganda,
Ugandans in the diaspora, like,
how can they vote? But from the word go, I have never had any of these reformists
answer my question.
Come to say we need these people to vote. Okay?
Are those proposals from the Electoral Commission contained in the bill?
Has the bill been presented, by the way?
The constitutional amendment bill has been presented.
It has been presented?
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it.
You haven't looked at it?
Yeah.
There is an expectation that government will create the subsidiary bills, subsidiary legislation, which will be the Electoral Commission Amendment Bill, Parliamentary Elections Amendment Bill, Presidential Elections Amendment Bill, possibly, Local Government Elections Amendment Bill, but those will come subsequent to the Omnibus Bill, that is the Constitutional Amendment Bill that's been presented so far. Have you looked at it?
I need to look at it. I don't know if any of us has looked at it. I want to know if he has looked at it.
I have looked at it. I have read it.
I want to know if he has looked at it.
I think you answered, Charles. But
apathy among the elite as well.
I have read it. I see proposals about reformation of the judiciary to extend, to give more time, extend retirement age for judicial officers, to allow the Judicial Commission to appoint some of the judicial officers because some of that function was under the Public Service Commission. I have seen proposals about the Electoral Commission specifically, which is change the name of the Electoral Commission to Independent Electoral Commission. There is also a proposal that Parliament determines the number of commissioners, but the appointment remains with the President because that's a bone of contention.
But yeah. Stop there, Charles. The appointment of the Commission. If you have read the Constitution, if you are not here for the sake of arguing and really bringing out your oratory skills.
No, with respect,
I have heard you. I have listened and you have talked.
Yes.
I have listened and you have talked. So let me conclude my point.
Yeah.
Everybody knows who has read the Constitution that the President nominates and forwards these names to Parliament. A Parliament that is representative of every other Ugandan, representative of his party, of whoever's party, all of them are represented in that Parliament. There is an appointments committee in that Parliament, representative still of every party represented, including independents. It is that very committee that looks at Manguia, who has been proposed, looks at his track record, his impartiality, the kind of person that qualifies to be a commissioner, and finally gives a nod as to who should be appointed or disappointed.
I see Chris is itching to say something. Can we have Chris say something and then we'll possibly take a break?
I just wanted to explain what I meant by government reform, because now you are pushing Jotham to defend his staff. Electoral Commission is their perceptions, true or right, that you are machinery just for reeling in Museveni's people, keeping him in power. I am not interested in going through those gymnastics. I'm interested in the substance. Charles, when you mention in Parliament, you know that is an institution that is extravagantly incompetent and charitably corrupt. So it doesn't matter whether EC is angels are put there to manage the elections, they will bring the same incompetent fellows and uncharitably corrupt. So for me, whatever the circumstance, politics is prone, but it must have a bearing on the livelihoods of people. These are the kind of reforms I was talking about from government. Government has got permanent secretaries, government has got cows in the districts, they have DEOs, they have RDCs. A reform that would make me excited is the one which says we are going to give a PS a performance contract. You a PS for this ministry, these are the deliverables. Failure to do that, these are the sanctions. I want to see a cow in the district because one of the issues we are grappling with is, Charles, one, we have a problem with education. Outside the Kampala, the rest happen, there's no education. I want a reform which says a cow in a district, if there are no first grade children in your district of a particular percentage, you are fired.
But we don't need to broaden it too much. Because
I'm telling you, yes, we are talking about government being relevant. What are the issues we are grappling with in this country? Education, health. And where are the officials doing that? So I'm saying cows are chiefs in the villages there, in their districts. They are bribing councillors. They are doing this. I'm saying let's reform and say a cow, these are your deliverables. If you're a DEO, if you cannot produce first grade students in Kitugum, for what value are you to our education ministry?
Gentlemen,
fire you. If you are another DC, for instance, who represent the president, you head security. How can another DC preside over a district where there are no first graders? How can another DC preside a district where there are mothers? I want a reform to say you're another DC, there are DC mothers in your district, firing squad.
I hear
they
you.
are government delivers.
I hear you. The question,
But to say,
the question I want to ask is,
we want to elect Otieno to parliament to do what? Maybe to go and finish his mortgage in London.
The question is, what you're talking about is broad government reform,
Yes,
and electoral reform is specific to delivering the kind of people who can do the reform that you're talking about. But let's pick this discussion up after a short commercial break. We'll be right back. Sometimes actually do think that we should get some of the off-air discussions on the air when we take the breaks, because it's hot on and off the air. We're talking electoral reform or window dressing. Ona, let me come back to you. As a man who's contested and won an election, contested and lost an election, served this government and now in the private sector, a question about reformation of the electoral environment is a critical question. And there are clear proposals that have been put forward before. The Electoral Commission is one of them. Jotham Tarema doesn't want to talk about insulation of the Electoral Commission from the influence, perceived or real or actual, of the incumbent government, especially in its appointment. Do you think this is something that should have been addressed?
Look, I think in a small economy with the high level of unemployment like ours, most people are looking for jobs like in EC, and at the end of the day, you have to lobby for this kind of appointment. So the moment you get that position, you are going to be serving certain interests. I mean, this is the reality we are dealing with. So maybe the reform you need to do is, maybe you need something like we used to have in the Makerere when I was still a lecturer there. You have external examiners. Maybe you need to bring Kenya Electoral Commission should be carrying out the Ugandan elections, because to expect that you are going to get these pieces of Ugandans who will have no interest to be constituting an electoral commission is not going to happen.
I'm
You may be shocked, but this is the reality. I mean, most people, even if they are not politically motivated, they always have interest. That's why for me, I'm putting my faith in the people. That you only need a population that is fully aware of its civic duties to defeat impartiality in an election.
Well, your
To
earlier
defeat
point-
partiality.
Your first point was very, very important.
Who
point
brings
is-
that partiality in an election?
That's what I'm saying. It must come out of popular consciousness. I love it outside the Electoral Commission walls. You have educated the citizens. But if you have citizens
But that
who
is there.
are not,
That is
But
there.
they're all Ugandans.
No, Charles, let me help this conversation.
because
You organize an election.
Could you first listen? Could you
Let
first
me
listen to some?
complete
Let
my
me
point.
conclude
Let
this
me
thought.
complete my point. I mean, why is there this feeling that the election or the Electoral Commission is not independent? I mean, that's a big question. And for me, I would never expect that feeling to disappear because we are going to be dealing with human beings. But I think the only time when you will believe that the Electoral Commission is independent is when nobody complains about the outcome. It's not when you have a certain number of people or a group of people running it. It's when the outcome is not contested. But if you have had elections where people have gone to court,
But tell me
Then
an election in this
immediately the Electoral Commission-
Let me ask you a question. Let me
Tell
ask-
me an election in this world where results have not been ever contested.
Can we
The many, the many.
hold it, Jotham.
Point it out.
Can we
That
stick
is
to
part
the
of
issues?
democracy. If you are not happy,
One of the
really
proposals
challenge the
on our
process.
was that to insulate the Electoral Commission, one is the perceived insecurity of tenure of office,
yes.
because they know that you're serving for a particular period, you can be reappointed. So someone works to try and secure the reappointment.
But there are grounds you can be
Hold
disappointed.
it a moment.
There are grounds.
The second thing was remove the function of appointment, of finding who makes the Electoral Commission, and vest it in the Judicial Service Commission, so that you create some insulation around it. And this doesn't seem to come through.
Charles.
No.
Who appoints the Judicial Service Commission?
The president does.
So you want to change, your argument is, if this is a team, this is the manager of the team, okay? And then the president, for example, FUFA president, let not the manager appoint the squad that is going to play. But let it be up. I'm trying to say.
I'm trying to get your argument.
You are
I'm not
trying to
getting
get
it.
my argument. You are saying remove the hand of the president in the appointment of the commission. Vest the appointment of the commission in
Into
the
the
hands
Judicial Service Commission.
of the Judicial Service Commission. But let the Judicial Service Commission be appointed by who? Where is the difference?
The
At
difference
least it would be
Where is
shielding
the
the president.
difference?
The
It would
difference.
be shielding the president and it would be
Why
helping
is
the
it that
perception of independence.
why is it that the Judicial Service Commission that is appointed by the president is so fair, is so impartial to appoint you an impartial electoral commission?
Maybe Joseph
Let me say this,
maybe Joseph should
Charles.
pick it up.
Let me say
the
this,
argument
Charles.
is,
Charles, let me say this. We all have our opinions as individuals, okay? In institutions, even in journalism. But if there are laws that govern your profession, you must work within those laws. You can bring anybody from opposition, anybody from government, to come to Electoral Commission, to be the chairperson of Electoral Commission. He will not do anything we are doing
Jotham, let me s-
different from what we are doing unless he does it outside the law.
Let me put my question differently. Does the Electoral Commission feel, you as working with the Electoral Commission, do you feel like you're now on trial because people are discussing reforms and reform of the Electoral Commission and the
We are not on
electoral
trial.
regime? Do you feel?
You are free really to propose reforms. But what
So why would
my
you,
argument
why
is,
why would you be fundamental opposed
I am
to
not
being insulated from political pressures or
no,
perceptions
it does
that
not
come
make
with the
sense,
appointment
Charles.
coming directly
It
from
does
the
not
president?
make sense. You are saying you remove the president's hand from the appointment of the commission, okay? But leave his hand in the appointment of the judiciary that should appoint Electoral Commission. What is the sense in that?
Joseph, what
yes.
makes the current structure of the Electoral Commission better than the Electoral Commission of 1980?
Where the current appointment of the commission is that the president will nominate names, he will forward them to Parliament for its decision.
And that of
Parliament
1980?
Parliament is representative of the independent people in this country, of the multi-party people in this country. It is the one at the end of the day to actually say, Joseph, you are cleared to be appointed as a commission. Which other body that is representative of the people's interests in this country that is not Parliament? Why are you talking of the appointment of the commission by the president and you are quietly leaving out that part where, with the approval of Parliament? Why are you living with the approval of Parliament?
I think that's where the fundamental question is, that it doesn't shift from what it was going into the previous election.
Do you want Parliament to, for example, do you want Parliament to nominate commissioners with the approval of the President? Is that what we want now?
I think that was one of the proposals, that the commissioners are selected by the Judicial Service Commission. The President does
a
ceremony
commission
appointment.
appointed by the President.
Yes, ceremony appointment, so that it
doesn't add anything.
Chris,
Yeah.
I need to draw you into this discussion. I need us to broaden it a little bit, because one of the major other proposals is creation of 36 new constituencies. The clamor has been Parliament is too big, unnecessarily too big, and needs to be reduced. But the question of insulation of the Electoral Commission, do you think it needs more insulation than it is? Because people say now it's exposed. When the President appoints the judiciary, he can't easily fire a judge that he has appointed. And that's the kind of insulation people are looking for the Electoral Commission, and thinking that would help it possibly become more independent, act more independent.
It depends on your frame of analysis on the Electoral Commission. It seems the focus here is Electoral Commission is seen to deny others to become leaders. And that's why Paul is saying reform Electoral Commission. But my question, my frame of analysis is, even for those it has allowed it to become leaders, what do they do with the power?
Chris is still on his point.
Yes. this one we're not agreeing. Fine, for you are discussing the hunting methodologies. How do you go to the bush? How you go where? For me, is you have to carry the animal home. I'm looking at the distribution. Are you giving the lamb who couldn't go and hunt the same meat, or you are throwing them on the side?
Exactly.
So this is what I'm saying. If we are looking at Electoral Commission in terms of giving people freedom to come to power as they want, to do self-actualization, then those who are not able to come are right to say we need reforms. But I'm saying, regardless, they are opposition members of Parliament in this country. I am asking, of what value are they to the taxpayer? There are too many NRM they have brought. Of what value are they to the taxpayer? And this connects directly to the creation of more MPs. It is political expedience. What is this MP going to do that 100 MPs cannot do? If it's about legislation. This is the distribution. And President Museveni is so smart. He is actually running the opposition in this country without them knowing. He said, okay, let us fund the parties. They give the money, he takes the big chunk. And the parties are happy that they are being funded.
Yeah.
Then you wonder, is this funding a reward to a particular political party, or this funding is meant to grow democracy?
It's elite politics.
If it is to grow democracy, then how do you discriminate? How do you say this one gets 30 million for us to get? In fact, by parties agreeing to be funded, they are actually funding NRM. Because NRM is willing to give you chicken feed, and it holds the big chunk of the money. And they are able to unleash the latest cars that UPC cannot afford, even the motorcycles. There are people always in the Uganda house with the jackets which have stayed for the last time about to leave to this country. And they throw you little money. So you are not discussing matters that help us.
You can buy some jackets.
That help us what? Deliver a service to the ordinary people. And Charles, as journalists, I begin to imagine of what is the end product of these elections. This is where I'm coming from. And that's why I began by telling you,
Welcome aboard.
if we have an environment officer in a district, we shouldn't be lamenting about environmental degradation.
Okay.
Let us tell, my reform should be an environment officer. Perform. You are not a DC, you have these pickups. You cannot.
Why aren't they performing?
That's the question I'm saying. Those are the reforms I'm calling for.
Yes, why aren't they
We
performing
should
now?
be defining the problem. Why are they not performing? What can we do? Because RDC has a vehicle. RDC has got fuel. RDC has got every year they are given the gratuity. How can an RDC be in a district like Bukedea? And for years, Obore cries when the results come, Bukedea has no first grade. I am saying let's reform and say RDC, if you are not supervising schools, you are short.
But
Okay.
now that is
Because
mental
the RDC was
reformation.
never-
That is mental reformation.
Yes,
because
DEO, why are you
Oh,
a DEO?
I think that's...
Get it?
That's
Yes.
mental
Such that
reformation.
when eventually those who are in the parliament, they are supposed to be discussing what I'm discussing. What are they discussing? you know?
Joseph,
Give us opportunity to go there.
I need to step in here, because
No.
which comes first? What's the scale of priorities?
Interestingly, in my first submission, I was going to suggest something along the line Chris emphasized, but Chris is a bit, my point is this. I talked about the electoral reforms and its irrelevance. I think to an extent, Chris is suggesting that the elites in Uganda have been substantially compromised. And I think all of us probably belong to that class.
That is the point.
But three, which is very important, is that Museveni has managed to buy the entire Uganda national project into his personal thing. And whenever some of us suggest that, some people switch off. And the point is this, that just as my brother Ona suggests, you know, people think every little bit of cup of tea, you know, is, it's a gift. Thank you from God. You know, it's not a right, basic right. People have outsourced their basic rights, from rights to vote, rights to question, rights to challenge, and probably in terms of their roles and responsibilities, rights to perform, including rights to think. Ugandans, we need to think. It is not about electoral reforms that we need in this country. Just look at the Constitution, 1995 Constitution, you know. It was an NRA project, and all Ugandans from various political facets, particularly starting with the CA, people ran into it because I'm going to be represented in the CA. You know, that is the problem.
Isn't that
1995 Constitution?
Isn't that a misrepresentation?
Let me help you there.
Yes.
Let me help you there.
Yes.
Just imagine, 1995, this guy said they went because Constitution's wrong, election's wrong. 1995 put 2-term limits, you know. Within the terms of Museveni, they've changed 2 terms. Do you know why? The 2-term limits was being done because they thought Obote had served 2 terms, which is a technical problem, not true. So, block Obote. 70 years, they thought they would not catch up with them. This is an NRA project which continues.
Chris called it the frame of analysis. I think that was your word. The question about the 1995 Constitution, it's gone through, it's about technically, about 4th or 5th amendment.
And do you know what I suggest in those days? Why go through that process? Why not amend the 1966 Constitution or 1976 Constitution? Why not even go to 1962 Constitution when Museveni came back?
Because you're a political
and save money that Chris will talk about.
Joseph, because you're a political actor. One, we agree we are in mental bondage as a country. People are mentally bonded somehow. The other thing is, even as you call for reforms, please avoid vendetta-driven legislation. I have seen that in our parliament.
That's right.
And there is a history to that, Charles. I spoke here last time. Do you know why today the Chief Justice of Uganda cannot discipline any judge, even when he's a supervisor? Because at the time of Wako Wambu's
you make a main point,
as a Chief Justice, there were magistrates, judges who were reprimanded, who were suspended.
Yeah.
But when the CA came, they went and contested to the CA and won. Yeah. They went and influenced the CA to delink the judge from supervision of judges, from disciplining of judges.
The Chief Justice,
the Chief Justice, yes. They deleted. And they gave power to the Judicial Service Commission, which is in line with separation of powers. Fine. But then you cannot have Museveni managing a cabinet appointed by Parliament, not himself. So you find now you have a good Katurebe, but his hands are tied. If a judge decided to disregard the Chief Justice today, he has to plead with the Judicial Service Commission, please. Now, if the Judicial Service Commission has interest in becoming a Chief Justice, then the incumbent will not perform. It almost happened to Wako Wambuzi. It took his soberness to sail over the sea. In our parliament, you may be calling for reforms in the Electoral Commission, but if they are vendetta-driven and not looking at the future of this country, you can disable today's Electoral Commission, and yet tomorrow, when those people who don't want are not there, the same commission can't perform.
Thank you.
So
MPs can destroy institutions in this country. If they know water, the MD there is not giving us some transport. They bring a legislation to undermine national water, I'm just using, because the MD there is not giving transport. Next time, if it is URA, if they think URA is not dancing to their tune, they come to legislation. We will clip your power. But you're destroying institutional growth as MPs.
Okay.
So let's avoid vendetta-driven legislation in the guise of reforming.
Okay, let me give each one of you guys a minute to talk about this, because we'll be transitioning when we come back after the break. How do we look forward to the future?
Look, the debates, as Obora has indicated, should get away from electoral reform, constitutional reform. It should come to governance reform,
that is
public delivery reform. You know, I have a theory here which is very strongly, which I strongly hold, that we need to dismantle the current public service system and put more emphasis on measurable delivery, but that must also be expect from people who have vested interests. I'm more for more private delivery as opposed to the current public delivery, which has there's consensus.
We run the course of privatization.
The president himself has complained repeatedly how government units have not delivered.
We could outsource that.
Despite abundance of resources, because you are a work somehow, we need to change the delivery method. Regardless of who we elect to come to parliament, the Independent Electoral Commission, at the end of the day, what is the end result?
What I believe we could outsource entire government and give it to Zuckerberg.
No, but
how do you move to the future? How do you look to the future about this governance questions?
Because the government is outsourced. The government is personalized property. And I keep on emphasizing, this government is a personal property. It's a project, it was an NRM project started from the Constitution to everything, including the electoral process. And if you read NRM objective number 1, NRA objective going to the bushes, you'll actually see objective number 1, number 2, number 3, number 7. All those other things are set in place. We need to read about them, and you guys who are in the media read about it and have a conversation with Uganda. But in terms of the way forward, though, is
you're doing having a conversation with Ugandans, so you better tell them.
I'm saying
don't outsource that responsibility as well. At least.
I'm delighted to be able to come back and have this very same conversation. But I think in terms of the future, really, we all need to wake up as Ugandans. I think the biggest person who might help us forward on this is Mr. Museveni. Mr. Museveni could simply say that, look, you guys, this is what supposedly we fought for. Tafari the other day said it was election or something. This is supposedly what we fought for. This is what we've been doing. And I think like you're trying to suggest to our colleagues in the Electoral Commission to say that, look, what legacy do I want to leave? Am I really the guy who wants to say that I created a new constitution and broke it 4 times in 5 years? Am I the one who came up and 7 judges out of 6 decided to take a particular position of what? Maybe Ugandans, let's look at the constitution. Let's respect them. Let's look at what the opposition are saying. The other day, I had Kahindo Tafere on a different program, and he came across as extremely arrogant to the extent on this conversation we're talking about, and I didn't want to refer to it on this program today, that it's almost as if it does not matter what other people say. MPs, the MP submission that have come is enough for him, but the unfortunate thing is that it came a little bit too late. I think the arrogance of government and the state, unless that changes, and I don't know who was suggesting it here, our political leaders need to realize that government is on behalf of the people. But government is not an ownership of property that is actually supposed to be used to exploit the people.
Jotham, just a quick one from you. How do Ugandans help
There's something
you?
I want to respond to what he says.
I'm afraid we're going to take a break, so I keep it very brief and also respond to how do Ugandans help you as Electoral Commission to move forward?
When there is an argument coming and it is attacking Electoral Commission and we bring a fresh question, I lose out. I need to correct something he has just said.
Go ahead.
So that we can move to another question.
Go ahead.
Do you believe an Electoral Commission is Museveni's project?
Is
that what you believe?
In the current form, it is almost as much as a Museveni project as
yes
probably
or
Museveni.
no?
I do so. I do.
You believe it is a Museveni project?
Well, the Electoral Commission at the moment
yes
is
or no? Yes or no? If it is a Museveni project, how come we have UPC leaders coming through elections the Electoral Commission has organized?
And actually that's part of the point.
If you believe... No.
Do you know what?
No, listen.
Simply because elections are held and some people win.
Why do we have UPC members of parliament? Why do we have UPC district leaders? Why do we have UPC lower leaders going through elections that have been organized by Electoral Commission? Why do we have FDC leaders from parliament to the lower levels?
That's a very good question. Charles, allow me to answer that. That is a very simplistic observation, but allow me to answer it. I'm answering it in this way.
No. That is
because the NRA...
Can we allow each other to speak to one another?
Can you allow me? Because
Can you speak to one another?
He doesn't want me to talk. No. Let me finish. You answered it. So let me
No, I haven't answered it. In 1980,
no.
There are 52 members of DP. There was 1 member of NRA.
Excuse me.
There are 74 members of UPC.
Excuse me.
What was wrong with that?
No.
Okay.
I want to conclude
What was wrong with
this,
that? So simply because there's a member of UPC in Parliament does not qualify the
Let me
Parliament.
make
I think
my
that's very
conclusion.
simplistic. I'm
Let me
shocked
make
by
my
that.
conclusion. Ugandans, most of us are good at talking. We don't even read. The reforms we want, they're actually within our laws.
Because they don't read.
They are within our laws. The problem is that we don't look at the laws. We think there are no laws. We need probably mental reformation.
That is true, because actually we've been enslaved for the last 30
Let's
years.
take a break.
Very bad.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll be discussing Burundi. We'll be right back. Would like to keep the Fourth Estate as the most democratic space available here. So by unanimous decision, we're continuing with a discussion on Uganda, and we're expanding the discussion. We'll have a little bit of the discussion about Burundi later, because the controversy in Burundi is about a search for a third term for President Pierre Nkurunziza, a similar kind of thing where we started from by removing Article 1052 in Uganda. Why we are actually here discussing this, electoral reforms. Rwanda is discussing the same. Possibly we'll be coming to discuss the same about Rwanda and President Paul Kagame. The Democratic Republic of Congo has had some demonstrations about President Joseph Kabila also wanting to remove term limits and run for another term. There was a banning of parliament in Burkina Faso over the same kind of proposal, and that seems to be quite controversial across the African continent. I think apart from Namibia, which made an arrangement that was accommodatable by everybody to allow the then president to run for an extra term without changing the constitution. The rest of the countries that have tinkered with term limits in their constitutions have had issues, one issue or the other. There's been another proposal, Chris, expand the size of parliament by 36 new constituencies. And yet, all the talk was, you have a parliament of 386 members, they don't have enough room to sit. Most of the time parliament is empty, the chamber is empty, and you don't see fundamental legislation coming out because of the numbers. Do you actually need to expand the representation of the people?
That one, Charles, even a nursery kid will tell us that it is not necessary. So I cannot bail on that one. It comes back to what I've been telling you, the purpose for which politics is played. And we play unproductive politics. I know politics is all about people's interests, you get money, but you must pay attention to the interests of the people. So politicians have their personal interests, but the people must also give their interests. So a government's role is to see how best the political interests rhyme with the interests of the citizens. In our case, a minister in Uganda is never dropped in the cabinet because of performance. They are dropped either they were seen whispering to Mbabazi, or the other president to vote me, I want to get votes this side. We need to reach a point where somebody has been sacked from a cabinet because of incompetence. And that says, I appointed you to do this, you have failed. A PS should be sacked because mama kids are rotting at Entebbe, and the women are not delivering on grass. A country like Uganda, come on, give me a break. I don't care whom EC brings. I care about what these people do with our money. This is not their money. Women can't deliver. And there is a full minister, state minister for this, general this is, primary what, this is nonsense, this what, and all of them are doing nothing. You go down, there is a cow, counting office of a district. And I keep repeating this. Why should Katakwi all the time have no first grade? Why should Buko have no first grade?
Because of fundamental
When we
change.
have a cow, we have a DEO, we have an inspector of schools, we have a environment officer, we have a RDC. The RDC is the president, supervising how government works. And that RDC still has a job the next appointment. When the district is in, there is no first grade. When the district is in, what is he doing? I am saying the reform, Charles, the reform we need is a reform that recognizes that we are all human, we are Ugandans,
You're going to have
they are minimums.
Katakwi might have another member of parliament to represent it.
But to do what? That is just addressing the surface issues.
Okay.
So for me, this is what I want Ugandans to understand. We cannot cry over wetland degradation. We have an environment officer. What are his of duties? Moreover, wetlands are disappearing, the environment officer is constructing. Meaning, we are paying him. We are paying him, he's progressing as an individual, the districts are retrogressing. You have an inspector of schools, and you say, our education has collapsed. For me, the radical reform, if you have a public office, if you can't perform like Otafire called is arrogant, if there was a performance contract with Otafire, the corruption in the judiciary could have caused him to be sacked.
Okay.
Simple.
Okay.
Before Joram
sure.
on the issue for number of MPs, I think there is actually desire amongst the Ugandans for more MPs. But
Is it?
Yes, but it's for the wrong reason.
Exactly.
The expectation of an MP is so palpable. Most people believe in this country that if there is anybody who can solve this country's problems or your problems, it's an MP. The problem is that the MPs whom they are expecting from so much actually do not have the capacity to solve their problems. So I would be happy to increase the number of MPs, but also change the role of an MP to suit the expectations. The expectations of the people is not the MP to make laws, but the MP to solve personal and community problems. If we want to fulfill that expectations, make MPs implementers of government programs, not so-called makers of law. Because there's a disconnect between expectation of an MP and why people want more MPs and what MPs actually do.
Then who will make the laws?
Just let me come to you.
You have a judicial commission.
What difference does it make if you have one MP representing 200,000 people or one MP representing 40,000 people?
Actually, smaller units, if they are well managed, are very good for delivery. But I'm saying people expect an MP to deliver, but the MP will never deliver because he actually doesn't have a budget to deliver. He can only come and allocate.
Let me give an opinion on that.
Is saying is not delivering.
Let me give a personal opinion on that. The dangling of new constituencies, in my opinion, has absolutely nothing to do with the people's demand.
Oh, what are you talking about? What are you talking about?
I'll explain to you what it is.
MP.
Yes, I'll explain.
People want. They think if you have an MP closer to you, you have something to get.
Told so.
They are told so. But number two, you have vulnerable guys in parliament here who think they can be saved by carving out a smaller constituency.
Yeah.
And you will find that in every new constituency that is being created. It's not a demand by the people. It is the people who want to stand in those positions going and saying, this constituency is too big, reduce it for me.
I'm saying it may not be a demand from you, but they are not unhappy about it because they think having an MP is you have something to get from the MP.
Let me put a question. What difference does it make if you have a constituency represented of 200,000 people represented by one MP or one of 40,000 people?
I think if it were the case that the systems work, naturally a smaller constituency would be an easier work for a member of parliament. In terms of the citizenry, it would probably be slightly easier for them to access their members of parliament. But also, as suggested, the role of a member of parliament is not to dish out. The role of a member of parliament is actually to be the people's voices, to listen, to sample opinion, and probably to play elements of oversight, and to come into legislating parliament, push for issues that interest their people, put in some extra knowledge and experiences beyond the boundaries of their constituencies and therefore the nation, and indeed to help as legislators of a national parliament to help the country to think beyond the boundaries of their countries. So, unfortunately, in this country, I have suggested, and I'll say it again, that probably, and I'm saying this without prejudice, that probably up to 60% of current legislators themselves, members of parliament, forget about their
constituents.
Yes, probably up to 60% of members of parliament would fail a detailed test of what the genuine role of a member of parliament is, up to and including probably the role as interested by the citizenry. If anything, probably that's the likely one they would say that one of my roles is to buy a bag of cement when somebody dies.
Joseph, as you come to Joseph and Jotham, there's some rhyming. Joseph, I know you're in opposition. I am very much pleased to find you disagree with Museveni on principle and offer very sound and logical argument, which may not be popular today, but it helps build your party. The other, you are talking about way forward. For me, in this proposal, in these reforms, I can stake my neck and go to the parliament and say the reform I want in that parliament is let each MP be paid by their political party, their salary. And we see how many clamor to become MPs. And we see how many will disobey their parties. For as long as the payment is from appropriation by the Minister of Finance, you are going to see many people wanting to be MPs. What is wrong with UPC paying your salary to go to the house to legislate for the good of Ugandans?
Okay.
For me,
what's wrong?
Depends on
I
why
want
UPC is
a
growing with
contrary
money.
reform.
Yes.
That's a contrary reform. Because the people genuinely expect from MPs for burials, for weddings and what, I'm proposing, give MPs more money.
Yeah, very
But well managed.
I find that
Because
interesting,
now,
especially...
you are giving money to a cow, an environmental officer who you are saying is not doing anything. Why not give to an MP who will at least give?
You see,
get
an
some
MP
fund?
is not-
I'm very surprised by actually what you're saying.
I'm actually
I'm being realist.
surprised by that.
That's a dangerous observation.
He's saying what's going on here. But
What's wrong?
just let me ask a
Each
very...
party pay their MP.
Let
to
me
be in
ask you
parliament,
a very
and we see.
fundamental question, because it concerns management of elections. When a proposal to create more constituencies is brought in at around this time, how does it impact on your planning as Electoral Commission? Because you have mapped constituencies, you have already mapped polling stations, and you're preparing for the next election. If you expand, what does that mean for you?
No, there isn't much impact, Charles. One is that the counties that will be created,
The new constituencies, not
they are
counties.
counties. They are not new constituencies, they are counties. They are proposing counties.
But they are splitting Bukele.
We
Bukele
already,
is one county.
if there are going to be 2 counties, then those are counties.
Well, gerrymandering, you accused of both
No,
of.
no.
Yeah.
Where the problem would be is, if you carved out, for example, you made there's a Nyabushozi West and a Nyabushozi East. And within the Nyabushozi West you have created, you split part of a sub-county. One part of the sub-county is in Nyabushozi West, and another part of the sub-county is in Nyabushozi East. That would be a problem. But the argument is that if you are going to carve out Nyabushozi West, for example, take the sub-counties, either 2 or 3, take them as a whole, leave the other ones intact. Because if you do that, you will not have tampered with our
The normal demarcation.
the normal demarcations. Then the other thing is the polling stations. You are not going to create.
So administratively, it doesn't cause you any problem?
It does not.
Okay.
It does not.
Gentlemen, I promised our viewers that... yes, could you just conclude?
What I wanted to say, Charles, before we go to Burundi, is to remind our voters that tomorrow is the last day of the update. You are either on this register, on the National Voters Register tomorrow, or never, until these elections are over.
We'll be talking about...
If you want to go and stand in the upcoming general elections, if you want to vote in the upcoming general elections, if you are not on our register by now, make sure tomorrow you are on. Beyond tomorrow...
Is that register the same as having a national ID?
The national ID is to facilitate...
No, I'm saying, if I have a national ID, can I guarantee myself that I'm on the register?
You need to check.
If you check and confirm that you're on the register.
You need to check.
But chances are that I will be on the register.
But you need to check and confirm. Don't go with chances.
you go and check your votability tomorrow, and as the last day. Though I think I want to bet on that. You remember the last time I had you in a different show here, we were saying, will you extend or will you not extend? So I was happy that you actually agreed to extend for those 4 days.
No, I'm actually happy that they stop tomorrow and they will have the lowest turnout of elections in Uganda's history.
But Charles,
gentlemen, can we move on?
One thing, Charles. Yes. We are talking of Electoral Commission reforms. And we
are talking about electoral reforms, not Electoral Commission reforms.
Electoral reforms.
Yes.
And we know parties in this country have their electoral commissions as parties. Why is it that we are not interested in also talking about internal political party electoral reforms, and we are only focusing on
the national
electoral reform?
I think it's a very valid argument you raise.
We give you taxpayers money, you don't give party commissions money.
No, but we inherit, we pick up from what the party has given us.
It's a very fundamental issue you raise, because the elections in DP, I'm told, have been some of the most chaotic. The Uganda People's Congress, Joseph Ocheno's party, has failed to do its internal elections.
Sorry?
You are giving them money.
Yeah, my party?
Your party has
the party that returned multipartyism in this country?
Your party,
is anybody responsible for that in Uganda People's Congress? I'm telling you, you're a traitor for the party and you're a traitor for this country.
Joseph, you know as well as I do that in the last 5 years you haven't held a delegates conference.
But Joseph, you haven't answered me. Why don't you want parties to pay their MPs?
Chris, I'm afraid we need to move on. I need to get a comment from each one of you about the crisis in Burundi, about Pierre Nkurunziza's desire to hang on for a 3rd term. He says that by the constitution, he has served his 1st term. But other people opposed to that scheme say you need to look at Burundi as a whole from the Arusha Accord, which put in place, which was the foundation for the country's constitution. So a quick comment from each one of you, and I'll run around the table and we get out of here.
This Burundi thing is just a thing. But I can tell you I'm surprised why the regional powers not intervened in Burundi in the interest of peace. You know, I saw a lot of chaos in that. How are you PDF has not been sent there? I'm wondering why. Why the selective intervention in this chaos? I'm wondering, I don't know why.
They're saying it's an internal matter for Burundi.
So in Sudan it was an external matter. In Congo there are always external matters. I am wondering why our UPDF is not sent there. I don't know how many should die to qualify. Don't know whether they measure that statistically. These people must die before we come in. Because there was chaos there.
So you're an interventionist, yes?
Yes,
you enjoy seeing NRA
I'm wondering why they are not.
Burundi is supposed to be going through an election this month. They're supposed to be going through the election this month. And part of the controversy is coming out of that desire by President Pierre Nkurunziza to hang on for another term in office. What do you make of that crisis there?
I trust the people of Burundi have the power to do what is good for Burundi and to avoid what is not good for Burundi.
Does that include the president of that country?
I think he's a do you call them Burundians? He's a Murundi.
Joseph Ochen, looking at it from a broader perspective, the question of this crisis about leaders wanting to hang on, and especially when the citizenry reacts like it has reacted in Burundi now, it reacted in Burkina Faso. There were some demonstrations in Kinshasa. Of course, in Kampala, there weren't issues in 2005 when they decided to lift Article 1052. What do you make of the crisis in Burundi and where it's coming from?
I cried in 2005, except that I wasn't surprised. But I think it's a very sad thing, because for what happened in Burundi, it would be very unfortunate that the Burundian president does not, particularly if he's got the interest of the country at heart. A country like Burundi, a country like Congo, a country like Rwanda, the experiences they had leading to where they are. And I think Chris is right about intervention, but in a slightly different way. Where really are the signatories of Arusha Accord intervening to make sure that actually peace and common sense does prevail in that country? I think we have a challenge in Africa where we have problems that when leaders come into power, they take up ownership on these things. I don't really know where the answer is, probably with the people, where leaders come to power and they don't have the confidence to retire and hand over.
You want the answer, Joseph?
You know, I used to be an
ask the British to find a vaccine against leaders wanting to stay in power for long. Otherwise, Africans, let's use their citizens as specimen. They can die in the numbers.
That's right. Okay. I wrote a piece on the New African in one of my columns a few months ago, and I was actually referring to Kikwete of Tanzania, and maybe the circumstances are slightly different. And maybe in East Africa, Kikwete is going to be emerging as the new genuine elder statesman of the region, indeed of the continent. Why some of these leaders don't think that their jobs outside State House, I haven't a clue. Some of these guys have got many more cattle than constituents. Some of these guys have got a huge amount of money into their pockets. Sometimes when I leave the studios and I walk in the streets of Kampala without a bag and expectations, I feel so light and so cool. I can't wait to go to Nagonga to sort out my chicken. These guys need to know that there should really be life beyond the boundaries of State House. But maybe because...
Beyond the presidential convoys and the guard brigades.
Indeed. But because I think these guys go to power sometimes dubiously, and sometimes they create so many enemies in the process, maybe they think the permanent security, the permanent insurance is to stick down there. Perhaps the longer you stay in, the more your other likely opponents and others will either die or forget the discussion that you had and the differences that you had. It's unfortunate, but let's pray for Burundi.
Ona, you trace Burundi's crisis to former presidents Melchior Ndadaye. You have Pierre Buyoya, and now you end up with Pierre Nkurunziza, and now you have a crisis that risks tipping the country back into a major crisis. Did you see this coming before? I imagine you must have been serving in government at the time the Arusha Accord was being crafted together.
It was always going to be potentially explosive because you know, the military in that country is in the hands of one ethnic group. Then there was a bit of tinkering to try and balance things. But look, that's
and that ethnic group is the incumbent president's ethnic group, and the military is standing with the people on the streets, actually protecting them against the police. from the police.
Yeah, those details. I think what is important now is that in this region or in Africa largely, is that staying in power is not so much a question of the constitution. It's a question of the individuals. Because you have in Tanzania people leaving power saying it's the constitution. You have in other countries people not leaving power saying it's the constitution.
All the people.
So I think the criticism for Nkurunziza is really his management of the situation. Because other people have managed to stay in power regardless of what the original constitution was, and apparently their citizens are happy with it, or are said to be happy. So it's no longer a big deal where the constitution says you cannot leave or you can leave. It depends on how you manage the situation. I think in neighboring Rwanda, apparently the situation being managed well. Some people expect that the constitution...
Some of these presidents in the region are trying to copy Museveni, who's far in the game than they think.
I guess
This
that's
is-
their problem.
He's their elder mentor.
Yeah.
Mr. Museveni is their elder mentor. That's a
He's
fact.
a smart guy.
Yeah.
He's managed to manage the situation. And I think really if Nkurunziza is incapable of managing the situation, then he should leave. He shouldn't blame that it's because he cannot change the constitution. Other people have changed.
So long as it's managed well, it's okay.
Yeah, I guess it's all about management here.
We can say that
How is it being resolved? The way it is
I
now.
think if the military is divided, then Nkurunziza is going to leave. Ultimately, something will have to give in. Because in all these situations, you must first have the military solid behind you. And if the army is said to be divided, I believe he will be
We
told
shouldn't have the
he
army
will die.
determining constitutional term limits and who
look,
stays in
look,
power.
across the world, the army ultimately
No, absolutely
has the
not.
power.
Absolutely
you
not.
see, Charles, those
Yeah.
countries are
Yes.
haunted by
No.
their history.
No.
They have a history of genocide. When you read that those countries, Burundi, Rwanda, their history tells you matters have always been sorted through bloodshed. Until the new leaders deconstruct that
That's right.
mentality.
And they should.
You are going to see continuous episodes of this violence because it is ingrained in them.
But
While the leaders who are coming up pretend to put a stop to that, they actually become perpetuators of the same. They are not handling the synchronicities. You see, here people who are angry with Museveni, you know, Museveni is a tribalist, Museveni, but he will pick emotionally, put it here. He will bring a chariot to run around with relief. Then when Napito's feel, we are so there, he will do this. He's a master in his own game.
Because
I think
Uganda's situation is different.
those who
because
want to study Museveni do not understand Museveni, including that president of Burundi.
Yes, and-
Let
and-
him
and-
come to
and I
State House
know-
in Tebe, kneel down, worship,
He'll
say
be
Museveni, he will be sorted.
And I thought actually precisely that these other leaders would be conscious about the histories of their countries and try to move their countries forward without them becoming the new problem.
yeah, yeah.
Because
They cannot.
as it stands now, Pierre Nkurunziza is becoming, might emerge or risks emerging as a new problem for Burundi if he tips that country back into the chaos that it came from
You see, first of all,
15 years ago.
you must know, those ethnicities there are few. Uganda, we have over 56 tribes. And balancing Uganda's ethnicity is a hard thing. Part of the thing you see keeping Museveni is not in the power is partly because we think he's strong, but also is driven by fear. Museveni is a terrible coward. That's why you see elections to him. He would rather purify a bullet. Museveni can fight any war, but Electoral Commission war, he fears a lot. So because of that fear, he's driven.
He has a bad experience from
He's actually
1980,
Anokonko.
yeah.
Because of that fear, he's forced to do things with a speed that helps him stay. When he realizes that this is what people are beginning to discuss, he thinks harder to how to dilute that. He will make any compromise. He will bring revenge later. That's why I never forget. He will compromise for the sake of him being safe, for the sake of him being in power. Now the other people, and there are many people to play here. If you Banyankore think Museveni is wrong, he will go and align with the Samia.
Obore, don't use so many
Yes.
words. The word is he has a vision.
That one is contestable. Vision, even if I have visions.
From your colleagues in Burundi, will the election go ahead given the crisis that is happening? Are they planning to move on with the election as planned earlier?
I have not talked to them. Let's wait and see how the situation unfolds.
What would you advise them to do? If you're advising the Electoral Commission of Burundi, what would you tell them to do?
I am not an advisor. I can't start it now.
This guy worked in the Electoral Commission. Want me to lose the job, Charles? You are very unfair to me.
Our time is out. We need to get out of here, and Joseph will have the last word on this crisis in Burundi. How do you see that getting resolved? and especially the silence of the East African community, the silence of the African Union on the Burundi crisis that Chris talked about?
I think for the East African community, the silence is explained by what has already been said. For the African Union, I was being accused the other day of being an expert on criticizing African leaders, and I'm quite content with that title, because the truth really is that African Union should really have intervened probably as way back as last year. I was a guest on an international radio station, I think 6 months ago, discussing this very same thing. So in others, we all saw it coming. The fact that it has actually reached where it is, and particularly because of the history of Burundi, it should be more than East African regional leaders should be at the African Union. And indeed, the biggest problem with African leaders is they rarely gather around themselves and see, brethren, that is wrong, that is bad, this is what we see. It's all strategic. East African leaders now are strategically quiet, looking for which way it is going to go or whether or not it's going to take their way. And I would not be surprised that some East African leaders are actually involved already in one way or another, including advising, take this route.
Joseph,
Well, I've been told at times that...
Joseph, if you people think the Electoral Commission is biased, assuming President Museveni appointed you chairman of the Electoral Commission and put people you call and put in with an FDC to run EC, and you decide to do a very good job, no rigging, no what, do you see an opposition candidate beating Museveni in 2016?
I think it's unlikely that Museveni would appoint me to head the Electoral Commission.
No,
in which case then that's irrelevant. It's unlikely Museveni would appoint me chairperson of the Electoral Commission. Thank you, Mr. Museveni. It's absolutely unlikely I would accept it anyway from Museveni.
The question is, if you appointed an independent Electoral Commission,
Our time is out, gentlemen. We need to get out of
An
here.
independent-
win an election.
It's very possible.
Presidential.
Well, it's very, very possible, yes. Very possible. Yes.
Our time is out. We need to get out of here. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for making time for the show. Thank you very much to all our viewers for joining us tonight. And do join us again next Sunday for yet another exciting discussion right here on the Fourth Estate.
So next
Have a
time,
good night.
Sunday, we are coming back here as we are. Start from where we stopped.
No. We'll manage that process. Here we transition.